difficult but successful Camp David negotiations in September 1978 produced two agreements between Egypt and Israel. One was on the basic formula of trading land, Sinai, for peace, normal relations. The second was a framework for providing full autonomy to the Palestinians in the West Bank. No treaty was signed at Camp David. Converting the Egyptian-Israeli understandings about a peace treaty was supposed to take no more than 3 months, with a deadline of December 17, 1978. But the negotiations dragged on for 6 months and seemed headed for failure several times. As President Jimmy Carter said during a state dinner celebrating the treaty signing March 26, 1979,
there were difficult moments, many difficult moments. Times when the differences seemed impossible to overcome. But at each of those times, just a few simple realities summoned us to renewed effort.
Although the Camp David Accords marked a landmark toward peace in the Middle East and earned the Nobel Peace Prize for Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, the two leaders had failed to solve some fundamental issues. Israel saw Camp David as offering full peace with Egypt without giving up anything in the West Bank or Gaza. Its negotiators opposed any proposals that could lead to non-Israeli sovereignty in the territories, a Palestinian state, or the stationing of Egyptian observers in Gaza. For the Egyptians, however, emphatic progress toward Palestinian self-determination was critical. Sadat's priority was Sinai, but getting back that land wasn't enough to justify normal relations with Israel in the eyes of the Arab world, including many Egyptians. Egypt needed some mechanism to ensure continual movement toward Palestinian self-determination, even if it couldn't happen as quickly as normalization. That meant tying what Israel wanted most, normal bilateral relations between Cairo and Jerusalem, to stipulated progress toward a Palestinian state. The Palestinians had no role at Camp David. Sadat represented them, which they did not approve. Israel and Egypt disagreed over whether Gaza and the West Bank should be treated separately or the same in the self-rule negotiations. Egypt wanted Jordan to join the negotiations and nominated itself to speak on Jordan's behalf. Jordan's King Hussein was perturbed that Sadat would say he could represent Jordanian interests. Hussein had turbulent relations with the PLO and its leader Yasser Arafat and was not about to enable Arafat or Sadat to speak for Jordan's West Bank interests. The Camp David Accords called for a 5-year process to transition to some form of self-rule for the Palestinians. At the end of that period, the final status of the West Bank would be discussed, but not necessarily clearly determined. The Labor government that led Israel until Begin's election in May 1977, and Begin's government, opposed the Carter administration's preference to establish an independent Palestinian state at the end of 5 years. The Egyptian and Israeli negotiators and their American mediators couldn't agree on how quickly a Palestinian self-rule authority would be created. Egypt and the United States eventually targeted the end of 1979, while Israel resisted a fixed date. Nor could they agree on when to start the clock on the 5-year period or even whether a hard timetable should be established. Egypt wanted to send police officers into Gaza as liaisons within a month of the treaty signing to safeguard the quick election of a self-rule council, and foresaw doing the same soon after in the West Bank if Jordan stayed out of the process, as happened. Israel was adamant in opposing that idea. Israel rejected any linkage between a Palestinian resolution and the establishment of full diplomatic relations with Egypt. Such linkage, Israel feared, would give the Palestinians too much leverage and would give Egypt a ready excuse at any time to halt or reverse the progress toward establishing full relations between the two countries, particularly if that happened after Israel withdrew her forces and settlements from Sinai. The potential result was a nightmare scenario for Begin, giving up Sinai with its oil fields, air bases, and territorial buffer, but not removing Egypt as a potential enemy in any future Arab-Israeli fighting. As extra insurance, Israel argued throughout the negotiations for the treaty to take precedence over any pan-Arab obligations that could lead Egypt to use military force or economic coercion against Israel in support of another Arab nation. Economic issues remained in play. Israel sought U.S. financing for its military withdrawal from Sinai bases to air bases it had to build in the Negev, but the United States was slow to make a concrete commitment. Israel also needed guaranteed oil supplies to make up for the loss of the Sinai oil fields. Because the United States couldn't persuade Egypt's fellow Arab nations to join or even accept the negotiating process, Israel feared that persistent Arab pressure on Egypt would lead it to cut off oil sales. Meanwhile, the revolution in Iran, which the Shah left hurriedly in January 1979, threatened to block half Israel's oil supply while driving up market prices and scaring Arab nations such as Saudi Arabia and Jordan away from any conciliatory moves toward Israel. The treaty negotiations had opened October 12th with optimism at Blair House in Washington. Israeli Foreign Minister Moshe Dayan and Egyptian Defense Minister Kamal Hassan Ali led their respective delegations. They used an American draft peace treaty as the basis for negotiation. Rather than link bilateral peace and the Palestinian issue in the treaty, they agreed to append a letter expressing their determination to work toward a comprehensive solution, and they made rapid progress on other issues. But Dayan acknowledged difficulties. The United States rejected a soft linkage between peace and the Palestinians and wanted the connection in the treaty's preamble. The United States also wanted the preamble to say the treaty should serve as the basis for treaties with other Arab nations, in line with Carter's vision for a comprehensive peace. Carter personally intervened October 19th and 21st, and the negotiators worked out a draft treaty to bring to their governments. Sadat didn't like what he saw and wanted fundamental changes. The Israeli cabinet accepted the proposed treaty in principle, but it rejected language tying Egyptian-Israeli peace to the Palestinian situation and a comprehensive Middle East peace. Israel also angered Sadat and Carter by deciding to thicken West Bank settlements. Both sides were dissatisfied with the new draft October 31st and began to stake out harder line positions. Carter, meanwhile, expressed exasperation that technicalities and tiny turns of phrase were standing in the way of history. Talks in Washington in mid-November, shuttle diplomacy by U.S. Senator Robert Byrd at the end of November, and by Secretary of State Cyrus Vance in mid-December, and even a meeting in Oslo during the Nobel Prize celebrations in early December all failed to break the stalemate as the Americans increasingly blamed Israel. The missed December 17th deadline didn't kill the treaty, however. Although Dayan said before a December 23rd meeting in Brussels that Israel had gone as far as it could, the session moderated by Vance renewed the hope on both sides that peace was still possible with a little compromise. Watch Part 2 to see how the treaty was achieved.